Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Mosley. I'm the director and curator for the Sangamon Experience at the University of Illinois at Springfield. And I am continuing our series of community trailblazers for Black History Month, and we're coming to our last episode. So if you have not been able to see the previous episodes that we have had here on the program, I encourage you to go to our YouTube page, and I believe we still have them still up on our Facebook page. And if you have any community trailblazers that should have been mentioned in our programs, or you want to learn more about, feel free to submit those to us, and we'd be more than happy to look into them and try and include them into the stories that we tell at the Sangamon Experience. It's been so interesting to go through this journey and discovering more about the African Americans who lived here in Springfield, Illinois, and those who continue to thrive and gain more awareness of our past here in Springfield, Illinois, but also throughout the county. The Sangamon Experience, first and foremost, is a museum on the base of UIS, and we've strived to tell stories about Springfield and Central Illinois and gain more awareness to the stories that are lesser known. And we try to bring them to light through exhibits, through digital components like this program that we have. But in addition to that, we like to showcase a lot of our findings through oral histories as well. So if there's a story that you'd like to contribute to the Sangamon Experience, feel free to reach out to us by emailing at sangamonexperience@uis.edu. So today I get to our program, which is called Desegregating Lincoln's Hometown. Now I ended up choosing this title because we try so hard to look to the past, and there are so many wonderful moments that we like to remember. And Springfield is often known as the land of Lincoln, home of the Great Emancipator, a individual who rose from being a farmer and surveyor and lawyer here in Illinois, and eventually becoming the 16th president of the United States. He is fondly remembered as one of our greatest citizens. And he lived here about a quarter century of his life. Now, Springfield was not the place he was born, but it's the place that he chose to live. And he purchased his first home here. Now, I give that example because we like to remember the good times. We like to remember the people who became legend. But the city is home to many other important historic events, buildings, and people. And however, Springfield's fight against racism is overlooked in a lot of the historic aspects of the history of the city. So this program is going to discuss the fight to desegregate Lake Springfield beaches in 1916, the desegregation of the Illinois State Armory, and the Springfield School District Desegregation Order of 1976, and the Federal Court Commission of Government that happened in 1987. And that one I'm very interested in discussing because in doing my research for this particular program, it shocked me that something as big as reforming government here in the area took place. And it wasn't that long ago. So it's very interesting to see what we can still discover within the past 50 years of our history. But I did add a little bit more to this program. I promise I won't go over my hour, but I found so many interesting stories that took place within the 20th century. And it's hard to only slim it down to a few stories. So strap in. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. If you're on Facebook and on YouTube, I'd be more than happy to address some of the questions you may have. And I am looking forward to sharing with you what I have learned throughout my time trying to discover more about Springfield, Illinois, and the fight against racism. So as we continue on this program, the first topic I want to discuss is the Centennial Cooperative Educational Congress of 1918. So this particular Congress was put together to help gain more awareness of Black Springfield citizens. And it observed the 100th anniversary of the state of Illinois in 1918. And it was a 3-day conference that examined the status, progress, and prospects of the state's African American community. Now, around 3,000 people attended the Centennial Cooperative Educational Congress. It was held September 22nd through the 24th in 1918 at the Illinois State Arsenal. Now, the dates were chosen because it was also the anniversary of President Abraham Lincoln's issuing in 1862 the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. You may have noticed when we celebrated civic season last year, we highlighted that there were a number of Emancipation Day celebrations, and we highlighted a few posters from that, and it took place in September. Now, that's the reason why they chose this particular date. Now, the cooperative education theme of the Congress referred to the need to educate both whites and Blacks about the importance of the two races working together, according to an elaborate 3-page announcement of the event published in the July 21st, 1918 Illinois State Journal. Now, the Congress was expected to recommend a creation of a permanent commission to deal with, quote, all matters touching the relations of the white and colored people, with the race problem in all of its phases placed in the course of an ultimate harmonious solution, unquote. Now, the speakers included both Blacks and whites. The first day's keynote was delivered by Colonel Roscoe Conkling Simmons, who's the individual who is on the screen here. Now, what was interesting in diving into more of his history was the fact that he was the nephew of Booker T. Washington. And that, to me, I thought was really cool because it shows someone from the big movements prior to the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, of people coming in and being connected to these large individuals. So Simmons, when he spoke, his speech focused on the sacrifices of Black soldiers fighting in World War I. And this is a cool quote from his speech. It said, quote, "Death knows no color line and bullets know no race. The first soldier to place a foot on French soil was a," and he says the N-word, "soldier, and a soldier will probably be the last one to leave French soil," unquote. Didn't want to use some of the words that were chosen, mostly because of what they mean to us today, and also it means a little differently coming from a white person versus someone else. So wanted to be delicate there, but what is powerful about his speech is he's trying to relay across that individuals were willing to lay down their lives for democracy. And I spoke about this quite a bit during one of our programs on African Americans in the military. And what's interesting about this is he's bringing it to life. In 1918, the U.S. was in World War I, and we had the Tuskegee Airmen that came in to fight, as well as a number, well, sorry, that was later on. But you had Otis B. Duncan, who we talked about earlier, who was fighting alongside other individuals to prove themselves, or they felt that they needed to prove themselves. But Simmons was making a point here that regardless of the color of your skin, we are all fighting towards a common goal. And regardless of who gets shot at, bullets still affect us just like everyone else. We are living people. We are individuals who matter. And so it's really inspiring to read some of the words that he spoke at this particular event. Now, besides the arsenal discussions, the conference highlights included a parade from the Black Masonic Hall on 8th and Washington Streets to the arsenal. The most notable entries the journal reported were those depicting cotton picking and a slave ship was a part of the parade. Now, newspaper accounts say little about the Congress's deliberations. However, a speech was made by the Reverend Lester Lake Riley, who was the rector of the Springfield Christ Episcopal Church. So if you're wanting to know if this church is still around, it is. It's right across the street from the restaurant Obed Isaac's off of 6th Street. Now, he demonstrated that even well-meaning whites often held opinions that disparaged African Americans. He noted that, quote, the spirit of lawlessness and lynchings, the disregard of the rights of the Black man. However, he did add, it is true that as yet has not adapted himself to the rigors of our civilization and the attendant vice, crime, disease, and death that statistics pile up against him are simply nature's clumsy way of eliminating the unfit. There is a better way, a more simple and direct way to overcome these evils, and that is by consciously directing the forces that are to accomplish the better adjustment of the race to this strange environment. He is here to stay, and we must take the responsibility for directing him. So the Reverend was focusing on how there may be all these statistics and the living that African Americans were experiencing in the midst of Springfield and its divided communities was not helping. And so there was a call to try to uplift these Black individuals who were living in these neighborhoods that needed clean water, better housing, and financial stability, jobs that were not just shoe shining and being a waiter at a restaurant, which there's no fault in that, but there was a way for them to be better educated and to move up within the social stratosphere within Springfield. And this is what the Reverend was calling for. Instead of just being a statistic, provide better environments and life for individuals. In addition to a lot of the work that was being done, the Congress was recognized by the NAACP and was written about in the crisis. And the legislation that was proposed in the General Assembly to create a state division of cooperative education was the idea that was never really enacted, though. Some of those involved with the Congress, including Riley, Illinois Centennial Commission Chairman Hugh Magill, Mayor Charles Bauman, and others, moved ahead with plans for an African American cultural and social center in Springfield. So this was something that the Congress wanted to create. And I want you to keep this in mind when we talk about it later on in the program, because here there was supposed to be an African American Cultural and Social Center in Springfield, but it wasn't really created. But there was a building designated, and there's a few stories that connect to some of the controversy with that particular building because of a man by the name of Zachariah Mitchell. And I spoke about him last year, but supposedly he lived in the building and ran the building itself. But that particular building was not really put to use. But at the end of this program, I'm going to be talking about something very similar to the building that was proposed within this potential Congress. So the importance and the reason why I'm highlighting this Centennial Congress that was put together is because it shows a group of individuals who were determined to educate both whites and blacks together to help come together and find a way for us to live harmoniously, to work together to help and improve the lives of individuals who lived here in Springfield, not just white, not just black, but all of us together. And so it's very important for us to look at this group of individuals and recognizing them, because this was only 10 years after the 1908 race riot. It was 10 years after one of the most national crisis riots that took place within our country. And it's important to see how individuals came together to try to find a way to work and find ways for us to live harmoniously. Now, this particular group would work during a very tumultuous time in our state's history. And there are still some groups around today that continue their mission. The next group I'll be talking about is a group of citizens that were involved in a very interesting controversy at first that ended in a desegregation lawsuit. And I'll get to that. Now, the beaches in Springfield, and yes, Springfield does have a few beaches, they're all centered around Lake Springfield. Now, Lake Springfield is a man-made lake. There's a wonderful book that was written by Curtis Mann, who also worked with a few others on telling the story of the creation of Lake Springfield. And you can find a lot of their images that were used within the book at the Sangamon Valley Collection at the public library here in Springfield, which this image that I have up here is one of them. Now, the beaches in Springfield had a few rules to them. The image I have here is from the Lake Springfield Beach House. You can see individuals having fun. This is a later date. So in 1916, women were not allowed to wear the bathing suits that you see today. They had to cover a lot more of their body. And there were a few women who got in trouble for wearing swimsuits that showed a bit too much skin. So in 1916, a Springfield women's rights activist by the name of Harriet Reed made fun of the Springfield Park Board's 1916 directive that women's swimsuits at the new Bunn Park Beach included skirts. Now, being a swimmer myself, wearing a skirt and swimming at the same time, that takes a lot of energy. That's a lot of drag when you're trying to push yourself in the water. And a lot of swimmers at that time realized the dangers of how much, if you were to add more material onto your body while you were swimming, you would wear yourself out by the amount of drag you would get from the water. So she ended up complaining about this. The park board had voted 5-1 to impose the restriction, which was sponsored by board member Dave Watson. Although the board discarded a Watson idea that women also be required to wear stockings with their skirted suits. I roll my eyes at this because that's just a lot to wear to go to the beach. And a lot of men wore less than that. So it's interesting to read some of the fashion from the time. What ends up happening is Watson ends up saying, quote, "I am against this proposition of women and big girls taking part in the bathing who are not sufficiently clothed to bring the place within decent bounds." So he ended up stating this in the midst of the debate and the voting of this resolution. His proposal may have been prompted by one of the frequent fair bathers who had equipped herself with a pair of tights for a bathing suit, which was reported in the Illinois State Register July 13, 1916. Now, the Bunn Park Beach, which opened in 1916, covered part of the shoreline of the 6-acre Bunn Lake. A concessionaire operated the beach for the Park District. A rented suit and towel and checking privileges were 25 cents at first, but then the price was reduced to 15 cents after a protest by labor unions in 1919. Swimming was free for people who owned their own suits and didn't need to check their possessions with the concessionaire. Now, early on, the reason why I bring all this up is because the desegregation of beaches, the conversation was actually started based on this particular incident. So while a woman was fighting for basically the right to wear what she wanted as a swimsuit, you have members of the African American community in Springfield stating, well, if she's able to argue this, well, then we want to argue that we have the right to swim at any beach in Springfield. And so this controversy ended up starting around the same year. Local African Americans filed a suit against the park board after 3 Black men, Charles Fred White, Lewis Dickerson, and A. Morris Williams, were stopped from swimming at Bunn Beach on July 27, 1916. The 3 first tried to rent swimsuits and were refused. When they entered the water wearing their own suits, the beach was abruptly shut down, according to the Register. And this is what the newspaper reported. Quote, members of the park board yesterday stated that the purpose of closing the beach at Bunn Park Thursday afternoon was to treat the water chemically to purify it in compliance with the recommendation of the State Board of Health made some time ago. They denied that the board had acted in any way that may be regarded as discriminatory against colored citizens who wanted to take a swim in the pool at the park. In a 2-year legal fight, a series of courts ruled that the lawsuit was filed wrongly and the injunction was denied. It is not clear whether Bunn Beach was ever desegregated. City health authorities ordered the beach closed July 1928 after determining it was impossible to purify the water in the lake. And for most of us who've lived here, contamination was a regular problem, and we've had to deal with that over the years in other parts of Springfield's water sources. Now, people had an alternative to where they could swim. So I talked about Bunn and the desegregation of that particular park and its swimming. But they also had Lake Springfield's beach house, which you can still see today. People are not swimming there. It's really cold right now in the middle of winter, but in the summertime, the beach is not open anymore. But there was also another beach, and I was really interesting to find this out. I couldn't find an actual picture of it, but I was told by a friend of mine that there was another program that was given, and I forgot when it was presented, but this particular person had pictures from the 1950s of another beach that was here in Springfield. And I was able to locate the image that she used. She posted it on Facebook, and it is the Bridgeview Beach. And Shatria Smith was the one who had the image. She gave a wonderful program on it, and I'm hoping to learn more from her. But the Bridgeview Beach was in Springfield known as the beach for Black citizens in Springfield. And there were swim lessons, and they had their own water activities over there. So it was interesting to see that there were other beaches that were being used, but also to find out that they were segregated. That to me just seemed interesting because I've never heard of any beaches in Springfield being off limits. But the more and more that I speak with individuals who lived here during that time, the more information I've been able to find on what life was like during the 20s all the way up into the 50s. And it's been very interesting to discover, and I'm hoping to share more stories about our citizens during that time that they lived here in Springfield. So as of right now, if you're wanting to see pictures of the different beaches in Springfield and the stories that are attached to them, a lot of the information I was able to receive through Sangamon Link, but also through the Sangamon Valley collection. There are a few photographs that you can find regarding the beaches here in the Springfield area. There were a few beaches throughout Sangamon County. So there were some in Riverton. There was also a few over in the Pawnee area and near Chatham, near the Sugar Creek area of Sangamon County. So if you do have any images from the 50s and a little bit earlier, feel free to share them because there is a lot to learn from the social interactions that we had as kids and the way that we were able to express ourselves, but also to make new friends and bond with our communities through enjoying a fun summer activity. Growing up, if you are millennial, a Gen X, you probably remember Nelson Center or Veterans Memorial Pool, or also Knights Action Park today. But back in the between 1916 and onward, a lot of the swimming holes were the places to hang out during the summer. But it's just interesting over the years how we have constantly had to desegregate areas that were unexpected. There were no real laws put in place to segregate these areas, but it was almost like a common law. And so in discovering more about our social hangouts during the formative years and how our social connections changed over time, it's very important that we tell these stories to show how we have evolved as a community. The next thing I want to talk about is the desegregation suit for education here in the Springfield area. Now, the reason why I brought this one up was because in digging, this took place in 1974. And what was interesting in studying this part is because it happened later than Brown versus Board of Education. And it also showcases how we can combat racism in the smallest of areas to make the biggest difference. So there was a gentleman by the name of Reverend Nigel McPherson who filed a suit against the Springfield School District in April of 1974. And he accused the district of numerous deliberate actions, all of which boiled down to creating, fostering, and maintaining racial and ethnic segregation in the Springfield, Illinois public schools. So the article that you see here is from the Register. And this particular article defines what was in the suit. And it made state news. It was focusing on how, even though we had white and black students educating together, it was the quality of education that he was concerned about. The image that I have to the right is Southeast High School in 1968. Now, it's a little earlier, but the Sangamon Valley collection has a lot of photographs from the Springfield schools in the 60s. And they have some from Southeast, Lanphier, and Springfield High School. And they're very fascinating to see, especially for those of us who have had parents that went to school here in the Springfield area. We can get a glimpse on what school is like for them. But if you look in a lot of the pictures, majority of the students are white in the images. Now, in looking at this particular case, you get a chance to see the suit as it plays out. And what ends up happening is that December, two parties filed a consent decree in which the district admitted that Springfield's public schools were racially segregated, and because of past actions, the district was responsible for it. Now, both the plaintiffs and the district submitted proposals to correct the problem, and U.S. District Judge J. Waldo Ackerman on December 7th, 1976, ruled on steps to remedy the discrimination. The school board's proposals for the middle and high schools were acceptable to both sides, but the crux of their differences were involved with the elementary schools, so kindergarten through sixth grade. Ackerman largely accepted the plaintiff's proposed structure, and here was his reasoning. Here's what he ended up saying. Quote, "First of all, I am convinced that the school board is in perfectly good faith in presenting this part of the plan, as well as their conduct throughout these entire proceedings. That being true, their plan entitled to great weight. But it is my duty to carefully examine each option and to choose the best one. After considering all factors, so I approached this task with the principal idea that whatever plan is most fair to all involved must be ordered, implemented. After all, this is what the Constitution is all about. If the plan is to work, it must not be, or seem to be, less fair to some than to others. This is the underpinning of the opinion." So when he was putting this idea together and steps on how to desegregate the education system within Springfield, he had in his mind a step-by-step process, and it was lined out within the case. Now, this particular step-by-step process was also run through the Board of Education in the state of Illinois. Now, this part of the education reform is still talked about today. And it began with this particular suit. The order ended up requiring the district to ensure minority faculty and staff are in at least some ratio as the minority bears to the population. So making sure that we have teachers that also represent students being in the classroom. And there should be that ratio balance and admitted into the step-by-step plan as the years progress. And what's interesting is when we look at the record of minority teachers, there's still only a small percentage of minority teachers within our school district. Now, according to the Sangamon link and the article that they wrote on this, they did some research and cited the State Journal Register in November of 2013 that only 11% of the district teachers were minority. By contrast, state figures for the 2012-2013 school year showed that student population was about 51% minority. So by the looks of this, having teachers be represented within the classroom that are a bit diverse was an issue back in the 70s, was an issue in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and it remains an issue today, making sure that we have enough representation. But teachers right now are still under a lot of pressure too because of certain regulations that they have to perform within the classroom, not just teaching, but also being social worker and trying to meet the needs of the students, and also make sure that they can cover administrative needs. So teachers are under a lot of pressure. So being able to provide support for our teachers, and also providing a way for them to feel comfortable in the classroom, and making sure that there are enough support staff there, so then teachers don't feel overburdened, is another thing that it needs to be addressed within our school districts, at least today. But this was something that was filed back in 1976 and has continued to be worked upon. Now, I want to make sure that that it's clear that there have been strides within our school districts, within District 186 and beyond. And we are still growing, we are still learning. But it takes us having those civil conversations together to try to make working conditions and the education system better year by year with the new batch of students that come in. So that is just one aspect of governmental change that was directed in the 70s. Now we're moving to a new decade, the 1980s. And this is where the state of Illinois makes federal news. The federal court opinion on commission government in 1987. So the reason why I brought this one up was because I was shocked. I was truly shocked when I read this. I ended up finding, when I was doing some research on the founding of towns and cities within Sangamon County for the bicentennial, I was looking for papers that gave dates for the origins of towns, so town ordinances. And when I was going through Springfield's records, I found a document connected to this particular commission. And I saw the date and I had to take another look, because that's 1987. That's not too far ago. That was in my lifetime. And this is kind of dating me at the moment, but it just shocked me. It was just very surprising. I ended up calling a friend of mine about it, and she was shocked that I never heard about it. And as a historian, especially being from this area, you would think that a young person would learn about this particular event that happened right in our own backyard. But sadly, we never learned about it in school. So I did a little digging, and I was able to find a few newspaper articles that discussed the case that was brought up. And here's what's been found. Back in 1987, it was in January of 1987, U.S. Judge Harold Baker ruled that the effect of commission government in the city of Springfield had to, quote, submerge African Americans as a voting minority, and had made it practically impossible for a Black person to be elected to city office. So Baker's ruling led to Springfield changing its form of government from a commission, under which 5 full-time commissioners were elected citywide, to act as both lawmakers and department administrators, to mayor aldermen, under which a full-time mayor elected citywide acts as city administrator, and 10 part-time aldermen elected from wards serve as the city's legislative body. This particular case made not just central and state news, but it made national news, because it's Lincoln's hometown. The Great Emancipator lived here. This should not have been a problem at this time, but it ended up being one. So it was interesting to kind of read that in the paper, but also think that in the here and now. So during this time, the commission government had been last adopted in 1911, in a progressive reaction to local government corruption. Among the most important advocates of the commission government when it was first created was Willis J. Spalding, who went on to serve 32 years as Commissioner of Public Property, basically utilities commissioner. The case in which Baker overturned this particular commission of government, so back in 1911, that was overturned in 1987 with the Frank McNeil, William H. Washington Sr., your Randolph v. Davenport, Howard Beale Sr., and Archie Lawrence versus the city of Springfield. And so in reading the different newspaper accounts, and I encourage you, if you do have a library card, you can read the old state journals and state registers. You can also read the State Journal Register through your library here in town. Now, in reading a lot of those, you can read a lot of the opinion pieces from a lot of key political individuals at the time. At this time, you can read quite a bit about what you had Frank McNeil, you had William H. Washington providing their own accounts. But you also have Mayor Michael Houston, you had Frank Madonia, you have James Norris, Ozzie Langfelder, and J. Patrick Ward providing commentary as well in the midst of this. Names that sound a bit familiar to us today. Now, this has been talked about quite a bit, but what's very interesting and is groundbreaking is after this ordinance was taken into effect and the city government was redesigned, it was the first election that ended up changing some of the people who became a part of local government. You have 2 Black aldermen that are elected. Frank McNeil, who was actually one of the plaintiffs during that time. And then you also have Alan Woodson, who also was elected. And he was actually in charge of a largely white ward. So there was improvement that was created after this case went up in front of the courts. In addition to that, it made a pathway for Black Springfield citizens to be represented within city government. It allowed a larger representation, a larger voice, and it has paved the way for a lot of improvements within the Springfield communities. And that's something that I think should be looked at, is that while this was a shocking revelation for myself to find, it was also inspiring because it shows individuals working towards a greater change that would benefit the city and in turn benefit the county. It allowed us to grow. It allowed us to make changes to better the lives of individuals, making sure everyone is represented. But it shows steps forward. It didn't show a step back. It didn't show us standing still. It allowed us to improve. And this leads to the next part that I want to highlight in a way that I feel like we have a lot of exciting things for the future here in Springfield. So as we study the past, it gives us an opportunity to improve the future. Each time we run into an opportunity for the betterment of our communities, we see it when we come together by recognizing our troubled pasts, but also recognizing the gaps in the storytelling. And that's why Sangamon Experience is so important, is the fact that we're trying to draw out a lot of these stories that have been overshadowed. And what's so exciting to see is that we are recognizing this within our communities through not just our storytelling, but in locating some historical markers that have been put to the wayside, so to speak. What's so inspiring is the fact that a lot of these sites, we're now getting an opportunity to save them. We're getting an opportunity to restore them and be able to tell the story with something tangible. So the first thing I have up on the screen is an image of Julia Stratton, who is our Lieutenant Governor. She's standing in front of the firehouse that was the colored firehouse. There was a wonderful presentation given by Ken Page about this project. There are still funds being put together to restore this particular building and to recognize it. If you drive by it on Adams Street, you'll see a wonderful sign that will discuss the importance of firefighters, especially the colored firefighters that lived within the Springfield area that protected the homes in our neighborhoods. And so there is work being done today to preserve that building and to tell the story of the firefighters who worked there. In addition to that, there is a wonderful project known as the Springfield Project being discussed right now. There are funds being put together to help restore a lot of the businesses that were in Southtown. And it's so cool to drive in that section of town to see some of the old buildings, but also to see the marquee of the Southtown Theater. But remember earlier when I talked to you about there being a Black community center? Well, there is talk to have one in this particular area. And so it's really neat to see that funds are being set aside to help improve some of these iconic areas that were once heavily populated, but also have a unique story to tell. Now, another story that's being discussed at the moment, and the Illinois Times, I can't tell you enough on how amazing it is to hear a lot of the historic stories and movements happening and reading about it in the Illinois Times. They're the ones that have showcased a lot of the pictures that I have up here. So I encourage you to pick up our local newspapers to read some of these stories because they are inspiring. The last image I have up here is of the Judge John Taylor House. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend you read more into John Taylor. He spent a lot of time serving the communities here in Springfield, specifically the Black communities. And he ended up developing quite a bit of an impact and a reputation for caring for those in need. So the Springfield Project is something to definitely keep an eye out for, and look at the improvements that are being made and the stories that are being brought to life within our community through buildings, through stories, and are uniting us as community members. And that really, to me, showcases a bond a community can build over time. But to end the program, I want to encourage you to reach out to a lot of these different organizations that are highlighting Black sites within Springfield, Illinois, or within your own community. But also keep in mind, too, that we're not just preserving these structures to create another historic downtown area. We are preserving these structures so that the stories of the people who lived here, who interacted with our community, who helped build it, that their stories are told, and that it's not just the Lincoln story in Springfield or just the land of Lincoln. It is the land of individuals from all walks of life who lived in the Sangamon region, and they had their own Sangamon experience. So as I close out the program today, I want to encourage you with an interesting quote that I was able to find about uniting our communities. And it is this: it is only when we tell the truth that we then have a consciousness that allows us to repair the damage, to restore confidence, and to build healthy relationships. by the time we have kids going through school and learning more and more about our local history, it allows us to come together as a community with a shared past, whether that be positive stories that we've been able to share, or whether they're hard histories that are very difficult to talk about, that are very emotional driven, but also very personal to us. Um, those stories allow us to uh, bind the wounds that Mr. Lincoln talked about in his second inaugural. It allows us to have conversations with one another to learn how we feel about the stories of our past, how they affect us now, but it also helps build the bridges that will help secure a better future for us as a community to draw ourselves together, to learn to live together, support one another, but also encourage people to grow and to thrive. So I want to thank you for attending the program today. And for those of you who've been tuning in to all of our other programs that we have had here at the Sangamon Experience, if you haven't had the opportunity to check us out, feel free to visit us on the campus of the University of Illinois at Springfield. We are on the first floor of the Public Administration Building. Public Affairs Center. Sorry about that. We also call it the PAC. The best way to get to us is in the teardrop, which is when you drive in, you park where all the flags are, and we are right through those doors. We hope you'll be able to stop by and see our new exhibits on the 200th anniversary of Sangamon County. But I also encourage you to follow us on our Facebook page, where we have new highlights on Sangamon County history, some fun memes that allow us to connect to our Central Illinois culture, but also some updates on new exhibits to come and new programming to come. So thank you again for joining me on our Community Trailblazers program for Black History Month. Join us next month when we talk about women within our community and the trailblazers that came before us and the trailblazers that are working within our communities today. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and have a great day.